Have you ever wondered whether the very first human being might have embodied a power or and glory beyond our usual understanding of earthly life? According to some ancient writings and mystical doctrines, Adam was not merely the first man. Some say he walked the earth with a divine essence coursing through him, as though he were the living reflection or even the physical vessel of God. Others reject such notions as extravagant speculation, warning that attributing divinity to Adam endangers the core message of creation and redemption. Today, we explore these questions in depth, searching old texts, examining theological perspectives, and sifting through threads of tradition that have reached us through centuries of faith. If there is even a spark of truth in the idea that Adam was once divine, it may reshape how we interpret the central drama of humanity's beginnings and its ultimate destiny. The importance of this discussion is often overshadowed by debates about original sin or about how literal the creation narrative might be. Yet if we look more closely, we find a topic of colossal significance, one that speaks not just to how our species started, but to our fundamental relationship with the Creator. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, Adam stands at the threshold between the heavenly and the earthly, formed by the hand of God and animated by divine breath. The book of Genesis describes how Adam and Eve walked with God in a garden, tending it in what appears to be an unblemished union. Over time, as religion spread across the world, various schools of thought asked whether Adam's creation in God's image implied more than a mere spiritual reflection. Could it be that Adam was in some way God manifest in material form, an embodiment of divine majesty placed upon earth for a time? We read in Genesis that God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Those words have echoed through thousands of years. What do they mean by image and likeness? Most interpretations say that humanity mirrors certain aspects of God's nature, moral consciousness, rational thought, and creative capacity. Yet some documents, passed down in obscure corners of religious history, suggest that Adam once carried within him a spark of absolute divinity. They describe an original brilliance or light that shone upon Adam before his fall. Is that brilliance symbolic, or was it a very real luminosity testifying to Adam's exalted state? Throughout the ages, numerous believers have hesitated to push this interpretation too far. They fear conflating the creature with the Creator, an error that can lead to idolatry. In mainstream Christian theology, Adam is revered as the first human being, but clearly distinguished from God. The traditional story asserts that after the fall, Adam and Eve were banished from Eden, becoming mortal, imperfect, and wholly reliant upon divine grace. This storyline places Adam firmly in the role of created being, not the divine author of creation. Yet in certain mystical traditions, an echo remains that perhaps Adam was not always so earthbound. In the writings of some early Gnostic texts, we find references to a primordial man or heavenly Adam who stood in the presence of God. There are passages suggesting that the Adam who appears in Genesis was a kind of reflection of this heavenly archetype, a being who once possessed divine attributes, but then descended into a lower state of existence. The Gospel of Philip, a key Gnostic text, makes cryptic statements about the origins of humanity and the interplay between spirit and flesh. Although its language can be symbolic or metaphorical, some interpret these passages as highlighting a fall from a higher spiritual realm into the material world. According to this line of thinking, Adam's story resonates as far more than just an earthly narrative It is a cosmic drama in which a luminous being is cast down, struggles, and must find redemption. One of the more intriguing traditions arises from the Apocryphon of John, also part of the Gnostic tradition. Here, Adam is described as a being of splendor, whose essence reflected the fullness of divine light, but who became trapped in the fabric of the physical universe. The narrative suggests that Adam's error, or fall, involved a forgetting of his true identity, prompting subsequent generations of humanity to wander in ignorance. Reading these texts, one senses that the idea of Adam as a purely mortal figure was not universally accepted in the early Christian era. There were, in fact, rival theologies that challenged the mainstream church's stance on Adam's nature, leading to conflicts that sometimes ended with certain writings labeled heretical or hidden away. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century near the shores of the Dead Sea, also contain fragments alluding to Adam's special status. While they do not unambiguously declare Adam to be God, certain passages honor him as the first man, or the chosen one. Interpreters debate whether these titles imply a quasi-divine role or simply reflect a veneration of Adam as humanity's progenitor. Nonetheless, the language is at times elevated, hinting at greatness beyond the typical notion of a simple farmer exiled from Eden. How many of these references are poetic flourishes? And how many might reflect a lost or suppressed memory of a more exalted Adam? The answer depends on whom you ask. The question of why these more radical interpretations have not been more widely accepted may lie in the history of religious orthodoxy. Over centuries, church councils defined doctrinal positions and established boundaries to protect the faithful from teachings that could lead them astray. If certain groups within early Christianity advocated the idea that Adam was an incarnation of God, such a claim might have been swiftly condemned as blasphemy or confused with other heretical sects that blurred lines between creator and creation. Yet as we examine the controversies that shaped church history, we see many instances in which minority traditions were pushed to the margins, sometimes losing manuscripts or scattering underground. Even so, speculation about Adam's uniqueness never fully disappeared. Some medieval mystics revisited the question of whether Adam's image bearing implied an original unity with God. They wrote allegorical hymns and commentaries suggesting that in Eden, Adam existed in a state of near angelic radiance. In some artistic depictions from various centuries, Adam appears hallowed or clothed in light, reminiscent of saints or divine figures. Although mainstream theology continued to stress that Adam was a created being distinct from God, these images hint that at least some believers toyed with the boundaries between mortal and divine in Adam's identity. One thread of tradition compares Adam to Jesus Christ, drawing on the words of the Apostle Paul. In 1 Corinthians 15:45, Paul declares that the first Adam became a living soul, while the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Many interpret the last Adam as Jesus, the Son of God. From this perspective, Jesus is the restoration of all that Adam lost, fulfilling the divine potential once entrusted to humanity. Yet could it be that Paul's words also hint at Adam's original status? Some theologians see in that passage the idea that Adam, before the fall, might have possessed a power or immortality closer to that of the resurrected Christ. According to this viewpoint, Adam's sin stripped him of divinity, making him subject to mortality and estrangement from God. Jesus, then, would become the second Adam, renewing that which was lost. In exploring these narratives, the question arises, did Adam truly share in the divine essence, or are we reading too much into poetic descriptions and allegorical texts? Proponents of the Adam is God theory insist that the earliest chapters of Genesis reveal a more profound truth than many are ready to accept. They argue that the breath of God breathed into Adam was more than mere life force. It was a fragment of the divine being, uniting Adam to God in an intimate bond. They point to passages describing Adam naming the animals, as though he possessed a measure of God's creative authority in shaping the nascent world. They note that God walked and conversed with Adam in a way suggesting more than a distant creator checking in on a lesser being. If Adam was merely an ordinary man, why would the scriptures portray him with such closeness to God? Skeptics counter that these details are easily explained as symbolism. God's breath instills life, but not necessarily divinity. Adam's naming of the animals represents humanity's role in stewarding creation, not a sign of godhood. The conversation in Eden underscores intimacy, yes, but it does not equate Adam with the Almighty. In mainstream Judeo-Christian thought, Adam remains fully dependent on God and cannot be recognized as divine. The serpent's temptation, in fact, revolved around the promise that Adam and Eve could become like God, knowing good and evil. This suggests that they were not divine already. According to the traditional reading, Adam's sin was an attempt to seize a godlike status prematurely. If Adam had truly been God incarnate, how could a serpent's lie persuade him to rebel? This point lies at the heart of the controversy. If Adam was truly divine, how could he fall? Some mystical teachings propose that this fall was cosmic in scope, describing Adam's mortal descent as a voluntary, or at least predestined act to experience the lower realms of reality. In such stories, Adam's choice opened the door to the rest of humanity, granting them a path of testing and eventual redemption. Others suggest that the fall was genuinely tragic, a catastrophe that cut Adam off from his original glory. The latter perspective might reconcile with the notion of a truly divine Adam, but it also challenges many cherished doctrines that insist God cannot err. Would not a divine Adam remain immune to temptation? Controversy often erupts around who might have distorted or obscured these ideas. Some alternative historians claim that early religious institutions deliberately suppressed texts indicating Adam's divinity to maintain hierarchical control. Others believe such a move was not sinister, but a protective measure to avoid confusion among ordinary believers. The complexities of theology can be daunting, and teachings that verge on identifying Adam with God risk causing schisms over time. Many writings that delved too boldly into these mysteries were lost, destroyed, or sidelined as the mainstream church solidified its canon. Ancient art provides subtle hints of how earlier communities viewed Adam's standing. Icons in certain Eastern Christian traditions show Adam emerging from the grave at the resurrection of Christ, as though intimately linked to Christ's triumph over death. Some medieval depictions in the West show Adam receiving direct attention from God, shining as though with supernatural splendor. While these images might simply illustrate the theological truth that humanity is made in God's likeness, they can also be read through the lens of a more profound unity or reflection. Either way, they invite us to consider how the faithful once understood the interplay between God and man in that primordial era. Fascination with these questions continues into the modern day. Some authors weave the Adam is God motif into spiritual or esoteric teachings. They speak of Adam as the universal man, linking him with the concept of the heavenly Adam found in Kabbalistic tradition, where Adam Kadmon represents the highest form of spiritual existence. In that realm, Adam is not a single individual, but the archetype of humanity, a cosmic template that embodies divine attributes. Such beliefs intersect with mystical strands in Judaism and Christianity, bridging the boundary between accepted doctrine and what some might label fringe speculation. In these explorations, one must take care to avoid inciting division. The aim is not to pit one community of faith against another or dismiss conventional teachings. Rather, it is to spark reflection on the many threads of ancient wisdom that have shaped religious thought. In a world filled with conflict, it may seem bold to delve into an idea so controversial. Yet the possibility that Adam once possessed divine attributes may encourage a deeper appreciation for every person's potential. If Adam once bore God's image in a more literal sense, perhaps that means every human being retains a seed of that grandeur, waiting to be awakened. Such an interpretation can unify rather than divide, drawing us to a sense of awe for the miracle of human existence. Many misunderstandings about Adam's nature can arise from conflating different genres of religious text. Some scriptures function as historical narratives, others are liturgical, and still others are deeply symbolic, intended to convey truths beyond literal facts. The same words can be read in radically different ways, depending on tradition and context. In certain eras, the notion of a godlike Adam was dismissed as an extravagant misreading. In others, it was taken more seriously, though still handled with caution. For much of history, the controlling question has been, does this help or hinder devotion to God and right living? It is also worth examining how these discussions resonate with broader philosophical concepts. If we accept that Adam represented God on earth, we encounter parallels with ancient Near Eastern ideas of kings as divine images, bestowed with heavenly authority. Scholars note that the biblical portrayal of humanity bearing God's likeness might reflect a reversal of such concepts, democratizing them so that every person, not merely a king, possesses that sanctity. Extending that logic, the suggestion that Adam was God in some embodied form would represent an even more extreme stance, one that set the stage for later controversies about Christ's incarnation. There is also a line of thought in Christian theology that centers on Christ as both fully God and fully man. Those who propose an elevated Adam sometimes see him as a foreshadowing or precursor to the incarnation. If Adam was formed without sin, lacking the corruption that later plagued humanity, perhaps he existed for a time as a perfect reflection of the divine. The difference is that Christ, in standard Christian belief, never fell into sin, while Adam did. This distinction is crucial. Equating Adam with God too strongly risks conflating him with Christ, and that has always been a sticking point for Orthodox teachers. Yet the notion that part of Adam's story was suppressed need not revolve solely around doctrinal control. It could reflect a more innocent process as religious communities spread. Teachings that seemed too esoteric or difficult to interpret were set aside to maintain clarity for the broader community. There was no widespread conspiracy as much as a natural inclination to preserve simpler, more accessible interpretations. We might see this pattern in other areas of spirituality, where certain complexities are reserved for the learned while everyday believers focus on the essential tenets. Nevertheless, whenever a suppressed or lost text emerges or gains new attention, curiosity flares. Investigators ask why these voices were hidden and whether they might enrich our grasp of the faith's mysteries. The answer often depends on one's perspective. Some believe these hidden views are essential pieces of the puzzle. Others see them as irrelevant or even potentially harmful deviations from the truth. Regardless, they often spark renewed interest in biblical interpretation and a deeper appreciation for the many nuances of spiritual heritage. As we contemplate the idea that Adam might have been God in the flesh, or at least a being imbued with extraordinary divinity, we must remember the central teachings that define the purpose of creation. According to the biblical narrative, humanity was meant to share fellowship with God, caring for the garden and the wider world in a relationship of love and obedience. The moment that Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they strained that bond, bringing death and suffering into the world. If Adam was more than a mere mortal, perhaps that tragedy was all the greater. An unspeakable loss of glory that plunged the world into darkness. The story then becomes one of restoration, culminating in the arrival of Christ as the second Adam. Through his sacrifice, Christ reopens the path to communion with God, restoring what Adam forfeited. In that light, the Adam is God idea takes on a powerful emotional charge. If Adam's divine status was real, and if he chose disobedience, it speaks poignantly to humanity's capacity to misuse even the greatest gifts. Yet it also underlines the majesty of human potential, if that relationship is ever truly mended. That is why some mystics wrote of the spiritual journey as a quest to rediscover the Adam within, to reclaim lost unity with the divine. These ideas, while dramatic, highlight the possibility of profound transformation and spiritual growth for believers who open their hearts to God's renewing grace. Another aspect to consider is how these questions might affect the way we see ourselves and one another. If Adam bore a spark of divinity, and if we are all descendants of Adam, do we not each carry within us a flicker of that same spark? Such a realization might lead us to treat others with greater reverence, seeing in every human face a reflection, however faint, of God's image. This perspective can foster unity, compassion, and a willingness to strive together toward a higher calling. Instead of fueling arrogance, it can inspire humility. For if humanity once fell from a lofty state, it means we have no reason to boast, only to humbly seek the restoration of what was lost. Of course, not everyone embraces such views. Many hold steadfastly to the belief that Adam was entirely human, though unblemished at first, and that assigning him any measure of deity stretches Scripture beyond recognition. They emphasize that Jesus Christ alone is God incarnate, an unrepeatable miracle, and that Adam cannot encroach upon that role. They see the notion that Adam was God as an old heresy, one that either elevates humanity too far or risks diminishing the uniqueness of Christ's divinity. For them, it is enough to know that Adam stood closer to God than any mortal before sin emerged, but never took part in God's own eternal essence. It is in this tension that we find our controversies. How does one honor the biblical portrayal of Adam's dignity while remaining true to the transcendent uniqueness of God? If ancient texts and art hint at a more exalted Adam, should we follow that trail or label it a curiosity of the past? And who benefits from these deeper investigations? For some, It might strengthen their faith to see how broad and intricate the interpretive tradition has been. For others, it might raise new and unsettling questions, calling for careful discernment. If there has been distortion or obscuring of these ideas over history, it might be driven more by the pursuit of doctrinal unity than by malice. Religious leaders often worry that confusing statements about Adam and God could fracture communities, so they draw boundaries to maintain order. Nonetheless, a spirit of open-mindedness can help us learn from these older or alternative perspectives, gleaning insights without adopting them wholesale. Perhaps we can appreciate the symbolic truth that each of us, in the depths of our soul, longs for a lost intimacy with God. In that sense, Adam's story becomes our own, whatever the precise nature of his original state. In approaching the end of our reflection, it is important to reaffirm what is most central. Every person has inherent value before God, made in the divine image, called to fellowship with the Creator. Whether Adam was partially divine or purely human, the essence of faith involves seeking a renewed relationship with God, one that Jesus Christ made possible for all. If the debate about Adam's possible divinity inspires you to explore Scripture, read about early Christian thinkers, or delve into ancient manuscripts, then let that pursuit lead you closer to the heart of love and truth. Let it push you to share your questions with friends or religious leaders, to open the door for honest dialogue. Let it awaken your imagination to the majesty of a God who can breathe life into dust. In your hands lies a power Adam himself once possessed, the power to name, to define, to decide how you will respond to the stories of creation and redemption. Will you dismiss them as relics of another time, or engage with them as a living dialogue with the eternal? Will you see them as mere historical curiosities, or as invitations to transform your life and the lives of those around you? The choice is yours. Faith is not a static set of rules, but a dynamic relationship shaped by study, prayer, and a willingness to venture beyond the familiar. If, in hearing these questions about Adam's nature, you sense a spark of wonder, follow that spark. It may lead you not only to deeper knowledge of biblical texts, but to a profounder awareness of your own worth as a bearer of God's image. Some might worry that focusing on controversial topics tears communities apart. Yet controversy can also serve as a gateway to more profound unity if approached with humility and a thirst for greater understanding. Scripture teaches that we see through a glass, dimly, that the fullness of divine truth is something we grow into. The possibility that the first man was a reflection of God's own glory should not lead us to arrogance, but to gratitude, stirring in us a longing for the wholeness that was lost in Eden and a readiness to participate in its restoration. At the end of the day, the story of Adam and Eve remains one of humanity's earliest accounts of how we fell short and how God, in infinite mercy, continues to call us back to a life of purpose. As you reflect on whether Adam could have been God in material form or something close to it, remember that your own life is steeped in the mystery of bearing God's image. This is the belief that all human souls carry a divine imprint, one that can be discovered, nurtured, and set free through love and truth. Let that truth guide you to honor others, to learn more about the sacred history that shaped civilization, and to open yourself to growth. If we are indeed children of Adam, then we share in whatever greatness or frailty he possessed. May that realization draw us to treat one another with compassion and to revere the miracle of life that pulses through every heart. In conclusion, we have explored a realm of faith and tradition where Adam is sometimes viewed not just as the first man but as one who bore, or even embodied, divine attributes. Whether these viewpoints are literal truths, symbolic expressions, or mere legends, they remind us that the story of creation holds deeper layers than many realize. Rather than stirring division, such reflections can point us toward wonder and respect for the manifold traditions that have contributed to our spiritual heritage. They can also help us recognize the sacred potential within ourselves and others, affirming that we are all precious before God. Let this be the takeaway: we stand as bearers of a divine image, worthy of dignity, and called to pursue truth in harmony. May that recognition lead you to research further, to share your findings with those who long for meaningful conversation, and to comment with your own insights and experiences. May you be inspired to seek unity in a world often torn by conflict, and to remember that above and beyond the controversies, there remains a timeless truth that each one of us, in our own way, bears a reflection of the Creator.